Pony Clubbers. We're now on week 4 of feeding. This is our final week covering this topic. So today what we're going to cover is we're going to look at the digestive system of the horse. We're going to look at the nutrients required in the diet, including the vitamins and minerals. We're also going to have a look at the quiz. So at the end I'm going to pop on a quiz that covers all of feeding. Each week I've been tagging on a part of the quiz at the end that covers the relevant parts that we've been looking at, but today you'll have the whole quiz. And then what we're going to do is when we come back after lockdown, we'll go through the practical aspects of this session, so looking at in person, looking at the various different ingredients, and then we'll have a testing session. So those of you that have been following along, if you could comment on the Facebook group underneath that you've been following along, that you'll need a testing session, just so I know how many need to do that, we can then make sure that we plan that in when we come back. Excellent. Okay, so let's crack on with this session. Okay, so the nutrients required in the diet of a horse. So the major nutrients, and we've covered parts of this when we looked at the ingredients, but I thought it'd be a good idea, as it is in the Pony Club book, to go through the nutrients as well, and also why we're feeding these various different ingredients to our horses and ponies. So we're going to have a look at carbohydrates, proteins, water, fats, and our minerals and vitamins. So the most important nutrient, and we did cover this in the first session, is water. So water is vital for the horse. The horse can survive a lot longer without any dietary food than it can without water. Between 60 and 70% of the horse's body is made up of water, and it is required that they drink up to 55 litres or 12 gallons a day. So that's essential. Water carries all the nutrients around the body, regulates body temperature, and acts as a lubricant and helps in the removal of waste and toxins. It's also present in all of the cells of the horse. So that is your first one. That's most important, is water, and easy to forget as well that is in fact a nutrient. Then move on to our carbohydrates. Now there's 3 different types of carbohydrates. One of the first one that we can think about is our fibre. So we can think about our fibre, often we'll think of that separately to carbohydrates, but actually it is part of your carbohydrates. That's really important. In the book it's called your celluso, I think that's pronounced correctly, but basically grass and other forage. Your starch, which is your cereals, and sugar, which is your molasses. So some of these will be called your structural carbohydrates or your complex carbohydrates, whereas some of your simple carbohydrates. Your simple carbohydrates are your sugars, your structural non-refined are your starches, and then you've got your fibre, which is your fibre types, so your forage types of carbohydrate. Okay, so these are important for providing your horse with energy. So when we talk about carbohydrate, that's your energy. When we talk about our roughage, that's when we look at the slow release energy. When we look at the starches, that's when we look at the fast release energy. Same with sugars as well, fast release. Okay, so hay, grass and haylage is where you're going to do your most, as we'd covered in our previous sessions. But extra energy can be given to the horse in your concentrates. Now, your carbohydrates is important for not only giving your horse energy for work, but also if you don't give enough, you'll result in a thin horse, loss of energy, and a cold horse. So your carbohydrates also, particularly the fibre aspects, keep your horse warm. Okay, so that's your carbohydrate. Too much carbohydrate and you'll get an overweight horse. Okay, so we need to make sure that we provide adequate amounts of carbohydrate. Okay. Then we move on to our fats. So fats within a horse's diet is important because it's what our carbohydrates is stored as. So the body will lay down the carbohydrates as a fat. So the way we would feed horses fats is often feed them oils. So if you've ever seen anyone add a vegetable oil to their horse's feed, that's when they're adding fat to the diet. Interestingly, a horse's diet wouldn't comprise of much oil in the fat in the wild, but they're extremely good at utilising it, which is really interesting considering their natural diet wouldn't contain much of it. Fat within the diet is more energy dense than your carbohydrates. So if you have a horse that struggles to maintain weight, then adding fats is a good way of adding those weights on. So the way you can do that is, as we say, in oil. And you've got some carbohydrate feeds like starches like oats that actually do have higher levels of oil in them. So that's where you can add in your fat. So they, as we say, are a concentrated source of slow acting energy, which helps to regulate body temperature and keeps the skin and coat in good condition. That's the other reason for feeding oil. You might see it keeps the skin and coat in good condition. Okay, so now moving on to our protein. So often you might hear this with your parents or guardians at home might say to you about eating up your protein so you build yourself up big and strong, and it's exactly the same with the horses. So when we feed our protein, that's about helping to build the body up, build up the muscle and tissue repair. So if you have an injury, your protein helps to repair that. Okay, so proteins are made up of a number of amino acids, and about half of which can be formed within the horse's body. The other half we need to feed so that the horse has access to everything, to all of them. So it's the essential amino acids that we're looking for. So we can find some of these in cereals, but good sources of protein are in your peas, beans, lucerne and soya meal. They all have high protein content. I don't believe we covered protein sources when we were looking at ingredients for our horse's diet. So I'll just add in here the protein sources. So we'll have a slide in here that covers various different foodstuffs you can add in for your protein sources for your horse. So lack of protein results in poor growth, poor performance, lack of appetite and condition, and a poor supply of milk in a brood mare. So your protein is required for the growth aspects. When you've got a young horse or a foal, for them to grow, they need their protein sources. It's needed in breeding stock to supply milk to those foals, and in your performance horses for tissue repair and muscle building. And of course, any horse will need a maintenance level of protein as to enable it to repair any injuries and to keep itself in decent condition. One of the myths that we have about protein, though, is that horses use it as an energy source, in the sense that too much protein can make the horse excitable. That's not true. The horse will only use protein as an energy source if it runs out of carbohydrate and fat sources, because protein is an inefficient source of energy, calories. I think the horse can do it, but it's more of a last resort. So if you're worried about your horse being overexcitable on a food, that's usually down to an overload of carbohydrate, too much carbohydrate, particularly the fast releasing sources, so high starch levels. For that type of horse, you want to feed less cereal based, less starchy feeds and more high fibre feeds. Okay. Excess protein, on the other hand, is dangerous. It can cause body and mental stress, overworks the kidneys and can poison the whole system. So we don't want to overfeed our protein either. So we don't want to think, oh, okay, we have our horse definitely needs more protein because it's a performance horse. We quite often see that performance horses do get overfed protein, whereas the protein requirements do go up in a performance horse, but not as much as people assume it does. So it's making sure that we don't overload the horse with protein. Okay, so those are our major nutrients, those three there. So your protein, carbohydrates and your fats. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our minerals. So the ones you will hear most about, and we've talked a little bit about these two already, are your calcium and phosphorus. The reason these two are important is because we must get the balance right in our horses' feeds. So it's really important that we have the correct ratio of calcium and phosphorus in the diet. Okay, so they both combine with vitamin D for bone development and maintenance. Bones are partially made of both calcium and phosphorus. So the balance between these two minerals should be between 1.3% to 2% calcium to 1% phosphorus. So we're thinking about a 2-to-1 ratio. Okay, right, so the need for these two minerals can increase depending on the physical and reproductive demands of the body. Okay, so it's important to consider that phosphorus is very generously supplied in cereal content of the horse's food, which is why we have to take into account the ratio, because it's quite often the case that we're feeding more phosphorus than we would calcium. So that's where we need to balance the calcium. So it's important that we then look at how we balance that up. So things like limestone flour and bone meal supply extra calcium. Not everyone wants to feed their horse bone meal because of course that's not strictly vegetarian, but some people do. We've also got sugar beet pulp, cane molasses and lucerne have high proportion of calcium in relation to phosphorus, so you've got those as options. And of course if you use a commercial cube or mix, they will have the appropriate ratio within those, as long as you feed to the recommended manufacturer's amount. Okay, and calcium is also vitally important in the blood as well, in small quantities. Now, the other thing that is not covered in the Pony Club manual, but it's useful to know about, is that a lot of commercial feed manufacturers do actually produce vitamin and mineral supplements, and also a form of feed called a balancer. And the balancer is essentially a concentrated form of a cube or a mix that has elevated vitamins, minerals and proteins within it. The reason you might buy a balancer rather than a feed, rather than a standard feed, is that you can feed less of it. So it's essentially the same in terms of its ingredients as say a standard horse or pony cube or competition cube, depending on the type of balancer. But what it means is that you can feed it about half of that or even less than you would of a standard cube or mix, and that is really helpful if you need or you want to feed something that's got the vitamins and minerals and protein sources in there and is correctly balanced, so that you make sure your diet is balanced, but you don't need all the extra calories that you can get with a pony cube or horse and pony mix. So for instance, my horse now is on a balancer. So Raven gets a balancer and sugar beet, and then grazing, ad-lib grazing, or if she's in, she gets ad-lib hay. Whereas Spirit, when she was alive, if she was doing well, she would just have a balancer, sugar beet and chaff, as well as ad-lib roughage. And then if she dropped off, she would have a conditioning cube. So if I needed to feed more calories, that's how I got it into her. If I didn't need them, then I reduced her down to a vitamin and mineral balancer, because I still needed the protein sources as well. As many of you may remember, keeping the muscle condition on Spirit was quite difficult, so she needed help with quality protein as well as regular 6-day-a-week work. Okay, so that's another way you can do that, is to use a balancer. Okay, moving on to other minerals. So you've got magnesium, which is needed for bone structure and as an enzyme activator. You've got your electrolytes. So you may have heard of these before, particularly if you've come across anybody competing or horses that become dehydrated. The idea of an electrolyte supplement is to enable the horse to become rehydrated if they have they've been sweating quite a bit. So sodium, chlorine and potassium, referred to as tissue salts, and essential for regulation of bodily fluids. Okay, so you would use those are important for rehydrating your horse if they've been working hard, sweating quite a bit. Okay, and then sulfur, so it's needed for production of enzymes, hormones and amino acids. So those are your major minerals, so your macro minerals as it were. Your trace elements, and these even smaller amounts of these are needed, but they're still essential. Iron and copper, which is involved in the formation of blood. Selenium, which is interacting with vitamin E for muscle integrity. Excellent. So those are the minerals that are covered in the Pony Club manual. Your macro minerals, as we talked about. So your macro minerals are your calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, electrolytes and sulfur. Okay. Your trace elements, iron and copper and selenium. Okay. Now, vitamins. So we all know about our vitamins, about eating up our greens and our fruit and vegetables to make sure we get enough vitamins in our diet. And it's the same for our horses. And what's really good in the Pony Club book, and I'll put a picture of this up as well, although I'll just show you one here, although it might be backwards, I'm not sure. It's actually got a section that talks about all the different vitamins and what it's used for. So I'll pop a picture of that in for you. So if you don't have a copy of the book, you can access it here. But there are two groups of vitamins. So you've got your fat soluble, which can be stored in the body fat, which are vitamins A, D, E and K, and your water soluble, which are required daily, so your vitamin B group and vitamin C. So these are produced by bacteria in the intestines and can be reduced by sudden change in the diet or by a course of antibiotics. So what the different vitamins are used for then? So vitamin A is used for vision, growth, reproduction, formation of tissue. So we say about eating our carrots to be able to see in the dark, and that is provided, vitamin A is provided by natural herbage and carrots. Vitamin D, which is required for bone structure, and we get that from sunlight on the coat or cod liver oil. Vitamin E, quality of muscle structure and fertility, which is provided by green forage and hay. Vitamin K, which is used for blood clotting, which is provided by green forage and hay. Then into our second group of vitamins, so vitamin B group, and there's several different vitamins within that. Utilisation of food, correct functioning of the nervous system, and it's provided by bacterial action on green food and forage in the gut. And vitamin C, which is used for correct functions of the blood and blood vessels interacting with iron and copper and as a defence mechanism, and that's produced by bacterial action in the gut. Excellent, so those are our vitamins, minerals and nutrients within the diet.
The function of the digestive system is to take in food and to extract the nutrients required by the horse for utilisation. Waste and superfluous matter is passed out in the form of droppings. The horse needs to use the nutrients for the following purposes: to maintain good condition, to keep warm, for energy to move, to grow and to develop muscle, to replace damaged tissue in the healings of wounds. For example, the system starts with the lips and the muzzle, which together select the food. The incisor teeth bite off the herbage and the tongue pushes it back to the molar teeth, where it is ground up and mixed with saliva. The saliva is secreted by 3 pairs of salivary glands. The purpose of saliva is to warm and dampen the food, but it also has a low enzyme content which starts to break down the ingested matter into a more digestible form. The chewed up food is then formed into a bolus by the tongue, which is a ball-like shape, ready for swallowing. As the horse starts to swallow, the soft palate, which separates the nasal cavity from the back of the mouth, lifts and triggers off a process which closes the windpipe, or otherwise known as the trachea, in the throat, which allows the bolus to pass through into the gullet, otherwise known as the esophagus. The bolus can be seen and felt going down the esophagus. It is forced along by wave-like muscular contractions, and the process of this continues throughout the digestive tract. The esophagus goes through the chest, between the lungs, and through the diaphragm. The food then enters the stomach through the cardiac sphincter, which is a ring-shaped muscle. Under normal circumstances, this muscle will let food pass into the stomach, but not back out of it. This is why a horse cannot normally vomit. The stomach can comfortably hold up to roughly 2.27 kilograms, about 5 pounds, of hard food at a time, depending on the type of food and its absorbency. It's important not to offer more than this in one feed, because the food would be forced through the system too quickly for the efficient digestion. There are 3 main enzymes present in the stomach. The pepsin, which begins to break down proteins into a more digestible form. Renin, the enzyme which coagulates milk drunk by foals. And lipase, which begins to break down fats. Some of the food may stay in the stomach for several hours. A little at a time is passed out into the first of 3 parts of the small intestine, the duodenum. Bile, which comes from the liver, is present in the duodenum. Its purpose is to emulsify fats and oils and to neutralize the effect of the acids from the stomach to make the environment more alkaline. Insulin and other digestive juices from the pancreas are also found in the duodenum, where they aid the digestive process. The jejunum, which follows the duodenum, is the largest part of the small intestine, and here the main digestion of protein and soluble carbohydrates, including sugars, takes place. Fats are also absorbed in the jejunum. The final part of the small intestine is the ileum. Here the process of digestion is continued, and in particular calcium and other minerals are absorbed. The food passes through the ileocecal valve into the large intestine, which is considered in three parts. The first is the cecum, the equivalent of the human appendix. The cecum acts as a holding chamber for the next part of the large intestine. Water absorption, which takes place throughout most of the system, continues here. The large colon follows the cecum. The breakdown of food in the large colon may take several days, during which time more food will arrive. This is why the large colon is so bulky and why the horse living out on good pasture has a big belly. The final part of the large intestine is the small colon. Water, minerals and any remaining nutrients will be absorbed here. Throughout the three parts of the large intestine, hay, grass and other fibrous matter which has not already been digested are broken down by bacteria. There are many types, each being specific to a certain foodstuff. The bacteria, or flora as they are called, will adjust to the type of food consumed. It is important to make major changes in the diet gradually so that the bacteria have time to adjust. For example, changes of hay should be made over a period of 7 to 10 days. What remains is mainly fibrous waste, which is formed into boluses in the rectum and expelled as droppings through the final sphincter muscle, the anus. During the digestive process, nutrients are absorbed through the walls of the small and large intestines into the blood to be distributed around the body by the circulatory system for utilization.